Fitschen. So, I'm very curious. How prevalent are the mental health aspects of bodybuilding and contest preparation, specifically things like disordered eating and body image concerns? How often do you see that in your athletes?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's fairly common. I think you need to do like I do a screening process with clients before I work with them, right? So like all of my clients fill out a client application form. I learn more about their background and what their goals are and all of that. Then I give them some feedback and my thoughts. If they're cool with that, we set up a time to chat, and then we sit down and talk for an hour, hour and a half, whatever it is, and try to really make sure that like their plan aligns with my plan and that like their goals are realistic or reasonable. And, I think you can weed out some of it with, what I mean, with that, but yeah, I think it's something you definitely need to think about before doing a prep because even if somebody has generally a pretty good relationship with food, body image, things like that, it generally gets worse at the end of prep when they're extremely lean and close to shows. And so you want to start in a good place so that like it isn't super detrimental at the end versus someone who's not in a good place. Sometimes I found people who go to turn to bodybuilding for the wrong reasons, maybe they feel better about things and the psychological part gets better during prep and then it gets exponentially worse after. Like
What are some of those wrong reasons?
uh,
Why a bodybuilder?
I would say the wrong reasons be things like, someone who's doing it to try to justify like a disordered eating pattern or justify like trying to stay super lean year round, which is not the goal, right? Like you get super lean for the stage, right? And so like they may feel good about things as they're dieting for a show and then post show happens and they have to gain body fat back and they have to get back to somewhere that's sustainable and where they can live and be healthy. And if they want to do this long term, like progress and build muscle and that's when everything falls apart because that then it's no longer like a getting lean. It's hey, I got, getting back somewhere sustainable and having some of that balance can be really challenging. And so I think having some of those conversations with people going into prep and being like, okay, this is what we're going to do post show also, and to get you back to a sustainable place again. And like this, we're only staying lean for this period of time. This is our window to do shows. We're not this isn't a staying lean for 6 months or 8 months or a year or, type of thing.
It's really, they have to, that identity is so fragile, especially with like new competitors,
Yeah.
and then getting them to buy into the fact that you must shift your identity coming out of a contest preparation, and the preparation isn't over after whatever the 4, 6, 8 months that you work together. It's an additional so many months to get back to this recovered point.
Yeah. And I think most long term competitors that are successful over the long term, like people who do this for decades, right? Like my first show was 2004. And, so it's been 22 years this spring. And I know people who have competed for 30, 40 years. You know what I mean? Like,
Marshall
like,
Johnson,
yeah,
that.
there are people that are still doing it 30, 40 years, after they started. And those people, you know, they don't view the show necessarily as like the end point. It's just kind of like a stop along the way, right? Like the journey, like they're focused on the process, they're focused on getting better. And along the way they do shows and it's fun. And, like we do this because it's fun, but the shows are just a stop on the process, and so I think realizing, yes, that life happens after shows. And like you said, with younger people, getting them to buy into the fact that like, if you're 20 years old doing your first show, if you don't compete again until you're 23 or 24, take 3, 4 years and while you're young and grow, like that's okay. The stage is still going to be there and you're still only going to be 23 or 24. Like the amount of years you have to do this, and trying to really like ingrain that in someone who's young. Cause I feel like with somebody who's younger, they really struggle with oftentimes with like feeling like they need to compete constantly and social media, I don't think helps that. And, and so, and that's not the case, right? Like I'm somebody who I've competed since 2004, every 2 to 4 years, um, like 7 shows or seven times to stage lean, 15 shows over that time. And, I think people a lot of times will ask me like, well, does your body, this is kind of a tangent, but they'll ask me like, does your body respond, uh, like you'd expect every time you diet? Well, yeah, I'm not dieting constantly. So I'm always starting prep from a place where I've been out of a deficit for months, years, and so anytime I cut, yeah, my body just kind of does what it's supposed to do. Like there's not any detrimental effects or health issues because I have off seasons. And so trying to ingrain that in somebody who's young and make them realize that like off seasons are important. You don't need to be stage lean always, I think is very important early on, and setting those realistic expectations. When someone who's competing in their first show starts telling you, yeah, I think I'm going to do this show again next year, and they're like, 19 years old and need to be bigger, being like, okay, let's slow this down. Come back at 22, like if you're 19, you know what I mean? Like take the years to grow, come back at 22, you're still gonna be super young, and you're gonna be significantly better because you took the time to grow.
I'm very curious. So you said a magical word, expectations. And that's something that I do in my clinical work and things like that, working with clients on their expectations. How do you, with your new clients and your veteran clients, what role does expectation setting, play in your coaching?
Yeah. So I mean, somebody who's a first time competitor, I think it's really common in like a client application. They'll tell me their goals to win a pro card. That's like the number one thing I see in like the what are your goals working with me question is win a pro card from like a first time someone who's never competed before. And I think there are people I have worked with who in their first contest season have won a pro card. They are generally genetically gifted. They've generally have lifted for a while, like that type of thing, right? Like you're 98% of people, aren't winning a pro card at their first show. Like most people aren't. For me, it took me to win my natural pro card. It took me a decade of training and 4 creps and like 7 shows. So, you
A
know,
little bit of time, a little bit of
yeah,
effort, a little bit of
and that's
consistency.
that's what that's realistically what it looks like for most people, right? Like it's something more like my timeline. And so, I think getting them, the expectation like win a pro card. And so I try to get them to focus on what they can control in that process, right? Because you can't control. So when it comes to placing, it's a combination of how you look that day and present your physique, also who else shows up or oftentimes who doesn't show up, and what the judges are looking for that day. Like if the class is close and it's a 1 point decision, a different judging panel could have it another way, right? Like it's subjective sport. And so you can't control who shows up, you can't control what the judges are looking for if it's close. All you can control when it comes to placing is how you look and how you present your physique. And so I really try to get people to focus on, okay, what can we do so that you look the best possible and, and presenting your physique the best you possibly can on that day. And if you're doing that, and then in between, taking an off season and in between, contest seasons, continuing with the process and progressing and getting better season to season, show to show, you're taking care of what you can control, right? Of placing. And that's where I try to really kind of shift focus from like, I want to win a pro card to how can I be as good as possible? How can I get better season to season? Because if you're getting better season to season, in general, you're going to probably get more competitive over time, and place better over in general, right? Like there'll be ups and downs depending on who shows up that day. But like in general, you're going to start looking better over time.
Another thing to consider too is once you crest that wave of pro card, okay,
Yeah.
now you're there.
Yeah.
Now what? Now what are you gonna do? Now it's
Yeah.
either you have to reel it in and go, "Oh, now I'm focused on the process of me getting better
Yeah.
year after year, decade after decade," or I'm gonna have to look at all these guys, like, I'm gonna step on stage with
Yeah.
Alberto Nunez or somebody like that,
Yeah.
and I'm
Yeah.
not gonna ever be that conditioned
No.
or,
No.
or something
Yeah.
like that, and so, really, that happens there too.
Yeah, well, yeah, when you win a pro card, that I think, yeah, for most people, they win a pro card, and that's probably the last show they're ever gonna win in their life, because there's just there's levels to this, right? Like, I mean, there are people like me, and then there are people like some of my clients who, like I had a client, in the overall at the Yorton this year. You're like, I'm not ever going to be in the overall at the Yorton. Like, I'm not that good genetic, I don't have those genetics.
Same.
Yeah, and he's standing up there with, the Marshall Johnsons and Magnums of the world, in the overall, and yeah, but there's even levels to that, right? Like he didn't beat Magnum, and but he, like, and so and so you have to, yeah, at that point, if you're going to keep competing as a pro, you got to focus on yourself and the process, right? And so, and just getting better over time. And I think unfortunately, you see a lot of people win pro cards and you never see them compete again because their why for doing all of this isn't super strong. Like it's more tied up in placing and winning versus being the best they can be, pushing themselves, getting better, whatever their why for doing it isn't strong enough to, you know what I mean? Like keep going.
It's almost like, you go to the beach and you have that one family picture, and it's just like, all right, everybody has to get in their outfit. And then we have this one moment at the beach, and they go and they go and they win their pro card, and they have those pictures, and they're like, all right, I had my moment. Now
Yeah.
I don't know what to do from here.
Yeah. Yeah. No, exactly. And so, I think there are times with like younger competitors where they get close to a pro card but don't quite get there, that I've worked with. And I honestly think in a lot of these situations, that's the best thing that could happen to them because then they put in work in the off season, they stick with it, and they come back in 2, 3, 4 years and they're significantly better. I can think of a couple clients where that was the case where like they were young, like early to mid 20s and very early on in competing, and they got very, very close to a pro card but didn't get it the first year. And then they came back late 20s, a little closer to 30, and got it. And the physique was, you know what I mean? Like much
So much better
like,
for it.
yes, yeah. So sometimes not winning right away, I think is, probably good. And when I started competing, this is kind of a tangent, but when I started competing back in 2004, very few shows were pro qualifiers at that point. And so like you didn't compete in an open class at a pro qualifier your first show because they were so incredibly competitive because there were so few of them. And even in 2012, when I won my pro card, I had to go seek out a show that was a pro qualifier because they all weren't. And those are more competitive, and so I think back then, like you really, it's a different world now, right? Like you can win one. I don't want to discredit, you know what I mean? Anyone's winning one,
No,
but
no,
it's
no, no,
it's
absolutely not.
different. It's
5 in a class,
different.
3 in a class, depending on the category.
Yes.
It really just it depends on where you're at, what category I
Yeah.
compete in. It's
Versus
not
like
like the 2010s.
no, no. Versus like I did a show in 2006. I still remember. I use this as an example all the time. I did a show in 2006 in Iowa, and it was not a pro qualifier. And this was back when it was just men's bodybuilding. So there was just bodybuilders. And so there were this was a non-pro qualifier, 4 open bodybuilding classes, and there were 8 guys in my class. Like, I don't remember how big the other classes were, but there were like 30 people, but I mean, it was only bodybuilding. It wasn't classic or men's physique. But like, and that was at a pro show that wasn't even a pro qualifier. Like now, if you had a show that wasn't a pro qualifier, nobody'd show up. Like you couldn't have the show. So, so I mean, for as many things as like have it progressed and advanced and social media has helped, I feel like some of this it's kind of hurt, you know what I mean? Also, right? Like, because the guys showing up at a show that wasn't a pro qualifier and this, and to have a show like that was competitive, those guys are doing it because they love doing it. It isn't like, hey, I got to win a pro card or achieve this whatever status. And I always feel like I'm like the old man when I, bring things like this up. But like it is something that has definitely drastically changed in the last 20 plus years I've been doing this.
Most definitely. I think I love the availability for people. The fact that I can have a show in Huntington, West
Yeah.
Virginia, that is almost unthinkable in the
Yeah.
past. So the availability is fantastic, but there's also this dispersion, right? Like it's less concentrated, so there's
Yep.
less people. You can have multiple shows in a weekend, but that means competitors in the same area
Yep.
aren't
Yep.
going to all the shows, and so
Yep.
it really is different. And I think the advent of social media really gaining in popularity, the like button, the hearts, that drives this body image that we see in young athletes, and that craving and striving for just like abs year round. It's just like, I'm just
Yeah.
gonna recomp, bro. Just constantly recomp. What's that conversation like with athletes who are just, so hesitant to put on the body fat and they think they can just recomp their way to
Yeah.
5 or 10 pounds more muscle?
Yeah. That's always a tough conversation. It's always tough because when it comes from me, because I have some of the most friendly body fat distribution. Like that is one thing I have genetically is very friendly body fat distribution. It sits on my love handles, on my back, on my legs. I can be 10 pounds over stage weight in my upper body. I could step on, you know what I mean, stage and be lean enough, and it's all in my legs. I have this really friendly body fat distribution to where when I was younger, it would get me in trouble because I would have people tell me, oh man, like when I was, 18, 19, 20 years old, they'd be like, "Oh man, like you can still see abs. You can just keep gaining." And so like I got up to like 60 pounds over stage weight because that's when I finally lost my abs. Like the problem is it was hiding everywhere else, right? Like it was still there. It still had to come off. It just wasn't on my abs. And so I think it's always a tough conversation, to have with clients because then they're like, well, but you have abs year round. And I'm like, yeah, but I can live at 30 pounds over stage weight and have abs. Like that's my body fat distribution. I can't change that genetically, and Cliff posted something. This is probably like 2016. Like he and I both competed in the same year, and he used me as a comparison. And it was the two of us at like the same. There's an old post from like 10 years ago. It's like the
I
two of us,
remember that.
the same amount of weight over stage. And like I have like very little detail in my legs, but I have full on abs. He has no abs whatsoever, and like he has striated glutes. Like, yeah, like just drastically different body fat distribution patterns.
Do you see that change over an athlete's career? Like, let's say they've never dieted for a show. Let's say you first start working with them, you bring them down, and then the body fat distribution goes into somewhat different places than it was prior to dieting for a show. Has that ever happened?
I don't know. I I still don't have a lot. You know what I mean? Like I'm 40 and I can still be 30 pounds over stage and 40 pounds over stage and see like it all and I still can be 10 pounds over stage and my lower body is not great. And it's all the fat is there and not in my midsection. And so I don't know, you know what I mean? Like I still have the same pattern. I don't know how much that necessarily changes over time, but one thing I try to point out to people is like, it will like once you're lean enough everywhere, you know what I mean? You will be lean even in those last to lose places. Like my lower body does lean out eventually. It just has to be that last weight that comes off from the waist down usually pretty much.
And I tell you, that might be mostly me anecdotally. I noticed
Yeah.
after my second contest prep with Cliff that whenever I entered into another dieting phase, my glutes would just come in sooner than they had
Yeah.
in my first show prep compared.
Yeah.
I just continued as I dieted, was surprised how soon my feathering would come in my
Yeah.
glutes. And it definitely
Yeah.
was not that in first show, and I didn't
Yeah.
have that in my second show. But after that point, it's
Yeah.
for some reason just the distribution to my glutes just it never like it's as you were saying, I maybe not 30 pounds over stage
Yeah.
and I would have
Yeah.
feathered glutes.
Yeah.
My glutes would be some of the first things to come in. And so
Yeah.
I was very surprised by that. That was a
Yeah.
change in
No,
my own body though.
that's crazy. And yeah, that's definitely the last thing for me to come in. Like when I was striated glutes, that's like the last like couple pounds I have to suffer for
Yeah.
to get to, and I'm not somewhere they come in early. And so one thing you will see though is as someone gets more muscular, you will see
Mm.
like someone who's more muscular, you can see typically more detail at a higher body fat for you know what I mean? It looks more impressive at a higher body fat percentage. And so, like I think of like my quads, right? Like I look back to pictures of like me on stage even when I was 20, 22 years old and like the amount of quad detail I have. And now I could be heavier than that and have significantly more quad detail because there's significantly more muscle in my, in my lower body now. And so I think building more muscle, you know what I mean, also helps it appear, like leaner at a higher body fat, seeing more detail, more separation.
And that's no, and that's an excellent point that I hadn't that wasn't at the forefront of my mind because,
Yeah.
obviously the more muscle mass you have, the
Yeah.
thinner you will look at higher body fat
Yeah.
percentage, which makes complete sense.
Yeah.
You and I could probably tangent our way down rabbit holes this whole podcast, but I'm going to redirect and I want to come back to something as far as so we were talking about we've gone through process expectations control. I want to come back to sort of that end of the contest prep period leading into the post show period. What do you think coaches need to look for as far as eating behaviors and possibly any kind of binge eating that occurs around them? Because to me, if it's going to happen, it's going to happen, a few weeks out from the show and then most definitely post show if the recovery plan isn't like set in stone.
Yeah, and I think the big thing with that is post show, the amount I would increase someone's food post show probably depends on the person, like Somebody who's struggling to hold on and stay consistent, I'm going to bump their food up a lot faster because the chances they stay consistent are going to be a lot higher if we can get their food up faster. And yeah, they may gain more weight back faster than what I want to see. You know what I mean? Initially, if we crank their calories up fast, but they're still going to gain a heck of a lot back a lot less than if it was uncontrolled and they were binging their way out of a show. Like that's where you see really, really fast gain, coming out of a show is binging. And I think a lot of people would be surprised how high they can get their food with if they're consistent with tracking post show, how high they can get their food without gaining a ton of weight back. It is crazy how high some people, can get before we start seeing gain. And you got to see gain post show. Like we got to be aggressive enough to see gain. And if someone's scared to gain weight back, okay, maybe we take it a little slower just to help them mentally, but we're still going to gain weight. Like that's still part of the goal. But one thing I think is really, really helpful is in an ideal world, I wish all competitors could be ready like 3 to 4 weeks out because then you can start walking food up and reversing into your show. And so like the worst part of your reverse is already done when you get to your show. Like your food's already fairly high and then you just go higher yet from there. So like you've already survived the worst of it. And so like, yeah, in an ideal world, that's what.
So in that world where you were able to walk up the food in that sort of perma-peaked
Yeah.
stage, what does a pre-show carb load look like if they have been perma-peaked for a while?
Yeah.
Talking because
It
Cliff
might be
was a
less.
fan of the backload and everything, but like it's
Yeah.
got to be less, right?
Oh yeah, it's definitely less because you're not as depleted. Like because if your food's super low and you're loading into a show, yeah, it's going to be higher. You're depleted. But if your food's already up here consistently, you might not be all that depleted. You might not need that much more. I've had situations, especially with like, I could think of a couple bikini competitors. Both of them are pros and won their pro cards when we did this. But the couple of them off the top of my head where they were ready early. We walked their food up, and their look was really, really consistent at a fairly high intake. And we did absolutely nothing during peak week. We just kept eating that high intake, like just reversing them into their show, like filled them out. They look great. We backed off training a little bit, the last week to kind of drop inflammation and stress on the body. We uh, pulled back on like vegetables and high volume food like the last 12 hours or so before stage. So they weren't like bloated and distended. And other than that, we didn't really change anything. They just walked on stage because they reversed into their show and food was high and the look was consistent. And yeah.
And I think you and I would agree that is an ideal place to be. That's
Yes.
ideal.
Yeah.
Ideal.
Yeah. That person, that's the ideal place. And that person's going to probably look and feel a lot better than the person who sets themselves up in a super tight timeline. The stress level and just overall enjoyment and experience. If I can have someone who gives themselves plenty of time, can diet pound and a half a week, they can be flexible with shows and they aren't like dead set on a certain show from the start. They can be flexible with what shows they do, that person's experience is going to be very, very different than the person that says, I am doing this show and I have exactly 20 weeks and I have to lose 20 pounds. So I need to lose 1 pound every single week. And I am for sure doing this show, no flexibility. No, that is the one. Those experiences are going to be different. Like you're the stress, the enjoyment are going to be very different. The person who's got to lose a pound a week every week, no extra weeks, no leeway on shows. You hit a plateau or two along the way. You might be 12 weeks out with 15 pounds to lose, and now we're not losing a pound a week. Now we're losing more. And then maybe we get down to like 6 weeks out, and maybe we got 10 to lose. You know what I mean? The rate of loss that they need to see just gets getting faster and faster, and they're falling behind, and they're stressed, and it's not as that's not a fun feeling, and then you're probably having less refeed days because you don't have time to have, a ton of, and just all of that type of stuff. Right. And where the person who can be flexible with shows, something comes up, we don't really lose much for a week. That's fine. We'll just get back on track. We don't need to adjust. We don't need to push harder. We'll keep going. Stuff like that. Right. Or like, and just there isn't the falling behind. It just kind of happens as it happens. And it's a lot more enjoyable in the fact that too, you can kind of position them then to be ready a little early and you know what I mean? And walk food up some going into their show and just be in a better spot.
Most definitely. So let's get away from the ideal because this is
Yeah.
this is great. That's fantastic. But I also I think that a lot of preps are a little bit more difficult than that.
Yes.
Yeah,
Yeah.
most definitely. And so one of the key moderators to a successful prep to me is It's like adherence to whatever the plan is, and a person's adherence, as you know, that's going to modulate depending on how
Yeah.
long they diet, what their starting point was. Did you have a positioning phase? How protracted the diet is? I'm curious if adherence is one of the main moderators of a successful diet. Should you be optimizing for that, even at the expense of, let's say, an optimal macronutrient distribution? What I'm thinking here is, let's say a sort of a higher protein set point, something in the
Yeah.
1.6 to 3.2, if
Yeah.
a person can adhere better to whatever their meal distribution is, 4 to
Yeah.
6 meals at a infinitely higher protein set point, but every time you lower that, it's a little bit more difficult for them to adhere to. Would you sacrifice some of the carbohydrate intake and possible performance macronutrients just so that they would adhere more? Does that make sense?
I Yeah, that makes sense. So I think it depends on how low other things need to go. You know what I mean? If there's some minimum amount of carb and fat I would want them to be eating, So if like, if it's a female who's down to like 1,400 calories a day and she's cranking protein up to like 250 grams a day, uh, that's 1,000 calories a day from protein, and you have like nothing left for carbs and fat. No different than a guy who's eating 2,000 calories a day, eating like 350 grams of protein or something like that. Or you're something crazy high, right? Like there's not going to be enough calories left to have amount of fat to be healthy and enough amount of carbs to like eat some fruits and vegetables to avoid deficiencies and have like some starchy carbs to help support training. And so I think there's probably a limit, but then also it's what is the person's goal, right? If they're a first time competitor, we're just trying to get them to the stage, maybe you're more willing to, you know what I mean, to do what you got to do to keep them consistent to get them there, or there may be a situation where it's like, okay, yeah, we could bring you in like 5 pounds leaner, but like let's get you to where we can get you this first time, you know what I mean? And having that experience. But if it's someone where the goal is like they're really good amateur contending for a pro card, like, they got a real shot at winning, that's what they want to do. Or you got a pro, trying to compete on a pro stage, like you're gonna have to push, you're gonna need to do everything you can do to be as optimal as possible. And so I don't know that I would. And so I think you have to have that conversation with someone too. And there are times where like you have to have that conversation too when like maybe consistency isn't there and it's causing them to have to lose at a faster rate now down the stretch than what you'd like to see. And I think then you have to have that. I've had that conversation with people where it's like, okay, what is your goal with competing? Is it to do this specific show or is it to be as good as you possibly can be on stage? Those may be two different things, right? Like, being as good as you can be might be, hey, we need to take an extra 6 weeks, and do something later. Or is it do the show and you're okay with being less than your best, and people compete for different reasons, but usually when you ask most people, they're like, I want to be as good as I possibly can be. You know what I mean? Like that's usually the response. And so it's like, okay, well, this is what we need to do to be as good as you possibly can be, and just have that conversation. Like, what do you want to get out of this? Like, what are your goals? And kind of take it from there.
Speaks more to that process-oriented individual.
Yes. Yes. Yeah. I generally try to focus much more on, like I said, the process rather than just the goal, the outcome, because consistently doing the process is what's going to lead to a better outcome.
Most definitely. With adherence specifically, diet breaks.
Yes.
Beyond beyond just a mental benefit, do you believe diet breaks have any other physiological benefits beyond just sort of improving adherence and giving someone a break out of that deficit?
Yeah, I mean, I would say the data's mixed and, I've seen in some people maybe they can get away with a little bit more food at first, when they start dieting again, for a little bit. I don't know if that's increased adherence or if that is truly an effect of the diet break, but the mental piece of it is important. And that's where, like I said, the person who can be flexible with show dates, like you can work in more refeed days, you can work in diet breaks, you can do a prep positioning phase where like, which is something I do with a lot of my clients who want to compete in like April, or May, right? Like if you want to compete in like April, for most people, you're going to have to start prep before January 1st to be ready, with the level of conditioning that's rewarded on stage. Like most people, a healthy body fat that's off season, is going to be more weight to lose than you want to lose in 3 months, um,
Yeah, yeah.
and so, for a lot of my clients that do spring shows, we start pulling back maybe in September, October, diet for a little while, get them done before the holiday, before like Thanksgiving, and then we just bump food up and maintain through like Thanksgiving, Christmas, and go the rest of the way in the spring. Yeah, that takes longer, but that gives them like 6, 8 weeks out of a deficit in the middle. You position them for prep, you work food up while maintaining that lower weight and, leaner body composition. And now we're ready to go January 1st. And now we're in a spot where we can pull back January 1st and get you the rest of the way there by April. And so I think, yeah, working some of that in is awesome if they're willing to like start 6, 8 weeks earlier so that we can do that, and so I think trying to get people on board with that. But yeah, the more flexibility you can have in show date and the more time you give yourself, the more of those type of things you can work in along the way. And the more you can kind of just like, ease your way on in rather than just having to, crash down.
Are those the healthiest preps that you see?
Yeah.
As healthy as one could be.
Yeah, I would say yes. Generally, I mean, generally those are the people who we're doing a refeed, maybe even a couple refeeds a week, and we're working in like a positioning phase, and then having time to diet break and being able to take it slow and not having to adjust at the first sign of a plateau always because we're short on time, and just the ones that can kind of take it more in stride. Those are the ones where like you look at their training performance, you don't see as much of a drop off in the gym and they feel better and they oftentimes they're more adherent, because it isn't just so strict and rigid and extreme. And so, yeah, I think oftentimes it's a healthier prep. And I think oftentimes they look better on stage too, compared to crashing down.
It probably keeps the stress levels low,
Oh,
which
I
we
would,
basically know
yeah.
high stress levels, and then also just could you talk a little bit about the role of sleep quality
Yeah.
in managing stress and then also sort of mitigating some of those negative effects of prep?
Yeah, no, absolutely. I mean, sleep is key, right? I mean, there is sleep and stress both, right? There's research showing that, people who are like sleep deprived versus people getting adequate sleep, you see differences in what they lose. Like people who are sleep deprived, I think in the study I'm thinking of, there was like 7.5 hours versus like 3 or 3.5 hours of sleep. And the short sleep group during the diet intervention lost more lean mass, less body fat. Like the people who slept more lost more body fat, less lean mass. You also see that from like a recovery standpoint, right? Like I believe I've seen research that's shown that like your recovery from like people who are super highly stressed aren't going to be able to recover from as much training volume as someone who is not as stressed. And you even see that in practice, right? Like people who are super highly stressed oftentimes have to push a lot harder to see loss than someone whose stress levels are less. And so I think that that's a big part of it, right? Is sleep and stress, and not you're not going to have stress. Everybody has stress in their life, but like finding a positive outlets for that stress and managing that stress. But yeah, that's like I've made posts on like what I think are probably some of the most underrated things when it comes to like prepping for a show. And yeah, sleep, stress management, daily activity like movement throughout the day outside of the gym, food quality, eating a variety of fruits, vegetables, mostly whole foods, like stuff like that, I think those are some of the most underrated things, right? Like, yes, hitting your macros is important. Yes, spreading your food out throughout the day and getting carbs around your workout and training hard and, all of that stuff, right, is important. But I think some of those other things that are oftentimes viewed as more minor factors are also very important and can affect prep.
Most definitely. So in terms of your sort of, let's say, I think people think about dieting. Some people think about dieting in this really linear approach where, I'm in a deficit and then I might have some higher days or whatever. Do you factor in sleep in terms of when you'll insert higher calorie days? Like if someone has had several consistent days of crappy sleep and there
Yeah.
wasn't a planned sort of break, would you introduce more just so that they can start, sleeping more?
Yeah, I mean, if that's a reason they're not sleeping well, and if we have time, that's always the question, right?
Within time.
So, because there are a lot of times I have to have hard conversations with people where it's like, I had just had one with someone yesterday where I was like, here's the, they're like, they're asking, can we fit in more refeed days? And I was like, well, given your timeline, no, but if you're willing to be flexible with shows and potentially do something later, then yes, potentially. Like I said, like, in an ideal world, I said, I think you need a diet break. I think we need to spend some time out of a deficit and go the rest of the way. But if you're dead set on X timeline and this specific show, then we don't have time to do that. So we kind of just got to put, like, we don't have, like, you're not gonna be able to do what I would ideally do because you don't have time, you know? And so I think that's always what it comes back to. I feel like a lot of times is, do we have time to do it? You know, there are things I'd like to do. It's just, do we have time?
You can do anything, you can't do everything.
Yeah, yeah, exactly, exactly. It's that time piece and flex, and just not, and that's where I always try to get people either to commit to being flexible with shows, or if they are unwilling to be flexible and they have to do a specific show, we start early. Like, I had a guy last year where we had a call probably around this time of year, and he was like, "I'm doing this show in September," and I was like, I think that you probably only need 5 months, maybe 6 max to diet, and we're 7 out. We're going to start now because if you're unwilling to be flexible, we need the extra time because you've never competed before. We don't know what your weight's going to be on stage. We don't know how you're going to look as you get leaner, how consistent you're going to be, how your body's going to respond. So if you have to do this show and you're dead set on this show, the only way I can guarantee you're ready for it is we have to start early, and so we started a month or two early, and his prep was a lot smoother as a result, because it wasn't up against a timeline the whole time. And so there was a lot of refeeds and higher days and things and along the way.
Definitely. So, and with that, I assume he got a lot leaner, and that's something I want to touch
Yeah.
on in terms of athletes in the leanest categories: men's open bodybuilding,
Yes.
women's physique,
Yeah.
the sort of psychological aspects of those sort of hormonal shifts. Obviously, I have no expertise in that, but I'm curious, how do you have that conversation with, let's say, even a first-time competitor? It's like, all right, my goal is to, I'm going to give you 8 months. I want to come in. I think I can have striated glutes. I want to be the lean as possible. They haven't experienced this
Yeah.
range of testosterone where they are possibly hypogonadal and some of the negative side effects there. And then with women, on the other hand, perhaps you have a first time competitor who doesn't realize that she might have some symptoms of amenorrhea. What is this talk with those athletes like?
Yeah. I mean, I think a lot of it is, I mean, first off, realize, I think having, you know, having them trust me that I've been through the process myself and I know what some of those things feel like, I think goes a long way because they can ask me, like, I'm feeling this, like, is this normal? And oftentimes the answer is yes, but sometimes it's no. Sometimes I'm like, no, that's not something that at all is associated with, but oftentimes it's like, yeah, that's normal. I would expect that at this point. And, I think really trying to, re-emphasize that, like, hey, we're trying to do this in the healthiest way possible. And, um, what you're feeling is just temporary, once you get through your shows, like, you'll regain weight. You're not going to feel like this forever. I think that's a good reminder when someone's in those final weeks trying to push for those last few pounds is okay. Yeah, you feel terrible. Everyone else in your position does too. That's normal. That's your body's normal response. But, like, know that this is not forever. This is not permanent, and you should and will gain weight back post show and feel normal, right? Like, most people, and, not to throw everybody in the same boat, but most people, I would say, post show, if you regain weight, most people within 6 to 8 weeks feel pretty normal. A My last prep, I think back within probably a month post show, other than hunger, I was pretty normal. My hunger full signals weren't really normal till maybe 6, 7 weeks post show.
Mm.
Something, even with gaining weight and pushing food, it just took take some time to come back. And then, about 4 to 6 months post show, you're 100%. You know what I mean? Like, everything's 100%. Like, you're hitting PRs again and stuff. Like, I was about 4 months post show, I was starting to have workouts where I'm like, okay, I'm back up around PR level strength. Like, we're good, we're recovered. But yeah, I think for most people, just reminding them that, like, hey, like, this will get better. And I think during that post show period too, reminding them that, like, you're not just because you're binging out of your show doesn't mean you immediately feel better and all these hormones immediately get better. Like, you need to gain that weight back. Yes, we're pushing food. Yes, we're gaining weight back, but that doesn't mean you're going to feel better with that. And I think that's where people get into trouble is they keep eating and eating and eating, hoping they'll feel better, and it just takes some time for some of those things. They kind of lag it to come around, and, like I said, I remember in my last prep coming out of shows, like, that was the one thing that lagged. Energy got better, like everything got better. Sleep, energy, you name it, within 3, 4 weeks was better, significantly better. And the hunger piece took, a few more weeks.
Could you talk about that a little bit more? Because I experienced this as well. There is something unique about experiencing what I would call physiological fullness. Like you
Yeah.
feel the
Yeah.
fullness, and
Oh yeah.
yet you are still hungry.
Yeah, you're
Talk
driven to
about
eat.
that.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That's
No,
fighting evolution at that point.
yeah, absolutely. Yeah, because I mean your body is trying to like not starve and not, so you're someone who's that lean, you're going to have, hormones that make you feel full are low and hormones that make you feel hungry are high. And a lot of those are tied to body fat, and needing to gain body fat back, in order to feel normal again. So, yeah, you can, and you see this in people post show, especially if they've never competed before. They will eat and go to like a buffet and just eat and eat and eat to the point that their stomach is like physically distended, like it is full, and they still are driven to eat more, and until like hunger hormones normalize, that is, yeah, and especially in those divisions where you have striated glutes, like a bodybuilding or a women's physique, like that is part of it, and you're feeling like that, and I think realizing that that will get better, you just got to give it time. Like that's not permanent. Like you're not permanently going to feel like that, and you don't need to binge out of your show to get that to go away. And if you do, oftentimes you still doesn't go away right away. It takes time. Like it doesn't just immediately get better because you ate a ton of food.
I imagine there has to be a ton of environmental control in that recovery plan. And what I mean by that is, uh, I love competitor bags, and at the same time, I hate competitor bags.
Yeah.
Only for those people, it's just like, all right, I just want my pro card, glutes, and then there are like 13 different bars in here. Man, so you've got that to deal with. So, how much do you talk about sort of environmental control in an athlete's success, whether that's pre prep, during contest prep, or post prep? And what I'm thinking is,
Yeah.
what are the foods you're keeping around your house? What are the relationships you're keeping up? To me, there's a
Yeah.
lot of environmental control that goes into this.
Yeah, I mean, it can, for some people, it can be, yeah, absolutely. And I think some of the people that struggle the most, competing general population weight loss or otherwise, are the people where their significant other is bringing home pizzas and eating fast food daily and all of that, right? Like, those people tend to struggle a lot. It's very difficult, to stay consistent when people are constantly like just eating pure garbage around you. You know what I mean? And so that can be tough. But one thing post show, I really try to emphasize with people is like trying as much, like I know all your friends want you to go out to eat, and you have some people have a list of like it's going to be bad if somebody has a list of restaurants they want to go to, or if they have a stockpile of food in their freezer, like junk that they've picked up during prep. Those are recipes for disaster post show. But normally I try to encourage people to really limit eating out, like eat something after your show, your last show of the year or whatever, go out with your family, friends that are there, whatever, and maybe have a meal or two out the next day as long as it's not a binge. But like, get back on some numbers, by Monday morning at the latest, and really, really try to have people like, really limit eating out until some of those hunger hormones calm down. I found that in myself to be really successful. Like, well, so I really, the first few weeks after a show, don't really eat out, so that, and then once I get back to the point where hunger full signals are back to normal, I've gained, you know what I mean? I'm a month post show or whatever, and I'm feeling pretty normal again. Okay, now I can go eat out, and the risk of binging or you know what I mean, anything like that's much lower at that point. And I think that, and then also just the knowing that, you know, just because your show's over doesn't mean you need to eat all these things at once. Like you're going to have, if you're doing this right, you're going to have years to go to all these restaurants, before it's going to be a year, 2 years, 3 years before you die, are dieting for a show again. So like, if you're doing this right, like you should be able to, you know what I mean? Like go here or there throughout your off season, enjoy the things you want to enjoy. And it doesn't all have to be that first week after your show.
Again, it comes back, it's that perspective shift to the long term.
Yes.
We think we get so myopic and acute
Yeah.
when you're in that state that it's hard to zoom out,
Yeah.
think in those long terms. I wanna take a sort of side road here. What role do values play in your coaching, in your desire to compete, in just whatever it is you do. Do you get what I mean?
Like, yeah, I think so. What specifically the values do you mean?
Your personal values. Like,
Yeah,
how about
okay,
you?
yeah.
So for me, yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, no, and so I think, owning a business, like, so, owning a business, and this has been my sole business for, I've been self-employed for almost 11 years now, full time. And so, yeah, I got done with grad school and just this is all I've done since. My business had grown to where it was a full-time job by the time I got done. And I've had people couple people have told me that have owned business over the years, early on, like you got to be able to sleep at night, like with the decisions you're making, and the way you're treating people and the way you're running your business. And so, I think treating people, I've worked with coaches, right? And several over the years. And there are things I like and dislike, about them or whatever. And so I try to with clients, treat them the way I'd want to be treated as a client, as a client, right? Like, so I think that's an important value. And I think just knowing, even if the conversation's hard, even if it's not what they want to hear, like having the hard like you got to be able to sleep at night. You can't, I can't just, hey, like there are coaches out there that will take someone's money and just do whatever, right? And there's way too much of that. But like having the hard conversations, even if it means like losing a client, like, if they don't like your answer, they just ghost you and you never hear from them again, which happens, and unfortunately, and they'll go find someone else that'll take their money and do what's probably not the right thing. And so I think, just, yeah, I think values play a role that way, right? Is knowing that, like, the people I'm working with, I'm doing everything I can to help them be the best that they can be, to the best of my ability. Do I make the right calls every time? No. No, there are times I definitely don't. And there are times like when it comes to peak week, like there are times where like we've tested it ahead of time. We think it's going to go one way, it goes a different way, and show day happens, and it's like, man, yeah, we look better, a day out or whatever. Let's adjust this and this for next time. You know what I mean? And get better. But we're still trying to get better, and we're trying to do what I can to make sure that they're as good as they possibly can be. So I think that part's important, and just treating them like I would want to be treated. Like not making them wait 4 days for a response or something like that.
Golden rule. I mean,
Yeah.
one of the better things. So peak week, again, we're gonna stem and we're gonna bridge and we're gonna go off in different directions. What percentage do you think peak week can make a difference?
Um, if someone's lean, it can definitely make a difference. Like you can, flat versus full, especially in those divisions that require extreme looks, like you can definitely see a meaningful visual difference when someone's flat versus full versus spilled. You know, there's still a difference in the less extreme divisions. It just isn't as drastic, but if somebody's not lean enough, I don't know that it really makes a difference. Like, you have to be very lean to see those details, right? Like, I start looking with clients at like how do they respond to their refeed days when they're getting to like 4 weeks out, 6 weeks out, when they're very, very lean, because it starts giving us some idea of like how do we want to position that load in your last week? Are you better the next day? Are you better a couple days later? Are you watery mess for 3, 4 days? That's what look is best, what pattern's best for you. I think, yeah, no. So, I mean, so I think that part's important, but if someone's not lean enough, you can't look at that at like 4 months out and see a difference. You know what I mean? Like you give someone a high carb day when they have 20 pounds to lose, you don't really see a lot of different, and so, and oftentimes when it comes to judging and scoring and placing, someone who has 10 pounds to lose or 5 pounds to lose, we'll probably just, if they're doing like that show and then they're doing something later when we get them the rest of the way there, we probably do minimal peaking for the first show because we're just spending most of that time trying to lose more body fat because that's going to mean more than any peaking approach. Once they get leaner though, then things start mattering a little bit more, and then the load, we start loading a little harder and all of that. But yeah, I think for someone who's lean, yes, and the more extreme the division, yeah, probably the more it matters. But I also, yeah, I think you got to be lean, lean first before it really, really matters.
That's really the main factor. I mean, you're not really going to notice the muscle cells filling and pushing against the skin if that fat layer is just too thick. So you're not going to notice
No,
something like
no, you just really won't. You know what I mean? You're not going to see the type of, you know, and that's, you know, you see that even with like fat loss and like progress pictures, right? So somebody who's got 25 pounds to lose, they lose 1 pound of body fat in a week, and you put those pictures side by side, probably can't. If you're gonna tell me which of those pictures is which, I might not be able to tell, because 1 pound of weight loss when you're 25 pounds over stage, you probably don't see much. You take someone who's 5 pounds over stage weight and then they're 4 pounds and they lose that pound in a week. You put their pictures side by side, I can tell you which one's, you know, the before and the after. Like the visual change from every little thing when you get that lean, you know, is crazy. Like everything's just amplified when you're that lean, I feel like. You also say, on a somewhat unrelated note, like you also see that, I feel like, with, you know, when somebody is really lean and like unsustainably lean, their intake is like when they eat extra calories and they're over their numbers. If somebody's 25 pounds over stage and they're at a healthy place, they have a meal out, their weight spikes a little, it comes back down within a day or two and whatever. If somebody's like 5 pounds over stage and super lean, like a little bit over, their weight spikes and like sticks. It does not come back down. You know what I mean? Is he like I feel like when you're super lean, every little thing just is amplified versus what you see when you're at a sustainable body fat.
Positive or negative. It's all in.
Yeah. Yes. Yes. Yeah.
So would you say that at about five, well, relative to the athlete, about 5 pounds over stage, pictures are going to be more important than weight?
Yeah, yeah, when you get super lean, absolutely. You know, I've had people send me pictures during peak week and they'll be like, "Well, my weight's up a little today." And I'll be like, "That's fine, you're still flat." You know, like that's what I care about more so. You know, like we still need to keep eating. I don't care that your weight's up, you know, or you know, usually there's some correlation as they fill out, like they, you know, the scale goes up, and you know, but that, not always. There are times where you'll see, like, you know, a lot of times I'll look at the pictures first, then I'll open the email and like look at what they tell me and what their weight is, and see if it, you know, I get my thoughts on what they look like first, you know, when they're getting close to a show, just because that part matters. The visual matters more. And that's why when I'm working with a client too, like with progress picture frequency, I always, when they're in the off season, we do like monthly progress pics, maybe even early out in prep during that like initial positioning phase or something, like maybe monthly. And then as they start getting closer, then it becomes every 2 weeks. And as they get, you know, we're getting to 8, 10 weeks out. Okay, now we're doing weekly pictures. And then they get really close. And I have clients update twice a week. And so they're sending them each update. And if we're testing out peaking stuff or peak week or something like that, it might be 4 or 5 days in a row. Or the last couple of days before a show, it might be multiple times, you know, throughout the day, you know, the last couple of days. You know, the closer your show is and the leaner you are, yeah, the more the visual stuff matters and the more we're looking at that.
Excellent. Peter, I want to end on a really broad question for you. Is that okay? You've been doing this for what, over a decade now, yes?
Like competing over two, coaching, yeah, like decade and a half.
Decade and a half. So in your decade and a half of coaching, how has your practice stayed the same and how has it changed?
Yeah. I think one thing, I think early on when I started coaching, people came to me because I was like educated, right? Like I had a master's degree, was working on a PhD, you know, all of that, right? And so I feel like I leaned very heavily into what the science says is best, you know. I feel like I've just seen more over the, you know what I mean, over the years, where there are just some things that like I see and I make a call because I've seen it or I have a feeling. You know what I mean? It isn't necessarily always science, you know what I mean, anymore, right? Like and so, you know, there was there was couple people last fall where things were just a little unpredictable with their look at the end of their prep. And there's been other people over the years. And so like I had a guy literally probably the last 3 weeks before his show, every day I got to the point where I was like, I can't even predict what's going to happen. So, you know, with your response to this or that, and it was someone I had prepped before, and it just was not the same. You know, it was just like things were swinging and unpredictable, and so I was like, and this someone was very good, like won an overall, won a pro card, has won pro shows in the past, like very good. And so I was like, okay, send me pictures and your weight every single day from here to the show, and there was just, we were adjusting based on that. And there was just sometimes a gut feeling or based on, you know what I mean? And like, I don't even know how to describe it. It was just, I've seen more, like with any profession, right? You've seen more and you kind of get a feeling of this and you can't really describe why, or like exactly, but it's like, I think this because I've seen this, or I had a guy a couple of years ago and he did his first show and I knew how his peak went. And I said, and he goes, what do I need to do? And he sent me like his weight the next morning after a meal out, and his weight was up a little bit, and I bumped his food up. And he goes, "But I have another show in a week, and you just increased my food, and my weight's up from my show." I said, "No," I said, "What we just saw in your peak week, I think if we didn't bump your food, your weight's going to bottom out." And even with bumping his food, his weight went down the next couple days. And he's like, "How did you know that?" And I was like, something I just had a feeling based on what I had seen, and so I feel like with my coach, you know what I mean? There's more of that, if that makes sense. Like, I don't even know what that is, right? Like just the experience of seeing things and having a feeling that, this might happen because I've seen this before in someone else in the similar situation type of thing. And don't get me wrong, there's still science in what I do, but I feel like I'm not as like tied to having to, I think early on, I felt like people expected me to do the best scientific thing and use a scientific, you know what I mean? Like way to do it, and I feel like, yes, that's still part of it, but like, I don't feel like I have to justify every decision I make with science anymore. I'm able to base, you know what I mean? So I think that's a big way things have evolved.
Oh, it's crazy. Almost just like this metaphor of you went from playing, chords in music to now you're playing jazz. Like you
Yeah.
can just take whatever comes your way and turn it into because of your, quote unquote 10,000 hours of expertise that you've derived from
Yeah.
seeing so many athletes.
Yeah. I think it's probably that, you know what I mean? Like that's huge. Cause like, yeah, I look back at like some of the stuff I was having clients do in 2000, like 12 or 13 or something like that. And it's like, yeah, everything I did, I could give you a study for why I did it. I look at what I have clients doing now, and my clients on stage are better now than what they were. Like I am a better coach now than I was then by far. And as you would hope, right? Like hopefully, as I've done this longer, I would get better at it. And I can't give you a study for everything I do anymore. I can kind of give you a why, kind of for some things, but like, and I think just realizing that I don't need to. I think getting the academia knocked out of me, where you always have to have a resource or a study to tell you why you're doing something, I think is, you know, more time out of academia in the real world has helped me, I think, in that.
Well, I could definitely use more of that. Peter Fitschen, this has been a fantastic conversation. Where can people go if they want to find you or utilize your services?
Yeah, so my website is fitbodyphysique.com. I'm on Instagram at fitbodyphysique or Facebook just as myself. Or if they want to pick up the book that I wrote with Cliff Wilson, you can find Bodybuilding the Complete Contest Prep Handbook is available on Amazon, and it's fairly affordable, but it's a great resource.
Most definitely a great read. Peter, thank you very much.
Yeah, thank you.